I'm standing in front of 300 people at my aunt's charity gala, holding the microphone with trembling hands, about to destroy the woman who stole everything from me. The projector behind me is loaded with documents that will expose her fraud, her lies, her crimes. This is it. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, 6 months ago, when I still believed my Aunt Margaret loved me. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and broken promises. I sat in the stiff chair across from Mr. Henderson, my father's attorney for 20 years, watching him shuffle papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My father had been dead for 3 weeks. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and whispered condolences, but this moment, this reading of the will, was supposed to be clear. It was supposed to give me answers. My Aunt Margaret sat beside me, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. She'd been crying since we arrived, her mascara running in perfect tragic lines down her cheeks. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back, grateful I wasn't alone in this. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. His eyes met mine for just a second before darting away. That should have been my first clue. I'm Madison Pierce. I was 24 years old. I just finished my master's degree in business administration, ready to help my father run Pierce Industries, the manufacturing company his grandfather had built from nothing. Dad and I had talked about it countless times over dinners at our house in Connecticut. He'd promised me everything. He'd promised me a future. The will was short, brutally short. Mr. Henderson read it in a monotone voice that made every word feel like a punch to the stomach. The entire estate, all the assets, the company, the properties, the investment accounts, everything, went to Margaret Pierce, my father's younger sister. Got nothing. Not the house I grew up in. Not the company I'd trained my whole life to run. Not even my mother's jewelry. The pieces she'd worn every day before cancer took her when I was 16. I sat there, frozen, while the words echoed in my head. Nothing. 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 Margaret gasped beside me, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned to me, eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock. Madison, sweetheart, I had no idea. Your father never told me. I'm so sorry. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Mr. Henderson wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the papers, gathering them quickly, efficiently, like he wanted this over with as fast as possible. I managed to stand somehow and walk out of that office. Margaret followed me, still talking, still apologizing, her voice a high-pitched whine that made my head pound. We can figure this out, she said. You can stay at the estate. Your family. We'll work through this together. I nodded because what else could I do? I had $3,000 in my checking account. My apartment lease was ending in 2 weeks. I turned down job offers because I thought I'd be running Pierce Industries. Had nothing. No backup plan. No safety net. I was completely, utterly alone. The Pierce estate sat on 15 acres in Westport, Connecticut, overlooking Long Island Sound. I'd grown up in that house. Every room held memories of my mother, my father, birthday parties and Christmas mornings and lazy Sunday afternoons reading in the library. Now it belonged to Margaret. She moved into my father's master suite the day after the will was read. I stayed in my old bedroom, the pink wallpaper from my childhood still on the walls, feeling like a guest in my own home. Margaret was generous at first, or at least she pretended to be. She gave me an allowance, $1,000 a week, paid from what had been my father's personal account. She said I could take my time finding a job, that I should grieve, that family takes care of family. But things changed quickly. Small things at first. She'd make comments about how much I was eating, how long I spent in the shower, how I really should contribute more to the household expenses if I was going to stay there. The allowance dropped to $500 a week, then $300. She started having her friends over constantly, women in expensive clothes who looked at me with pity and whispered when I walked by. I applied for jobs, dozens of them, but my resume looks strange now. Master's degree but no real work experience. References that led back to Pierce Industries, which Margaret now controlled. And somehow, mysteriously, I never got past the first interview. I'd walk into offices and see something shift in the recruiter's eyes when I mentioned my name. The Pierce name used to open doors. Now it slammed them shut. 3 months after my father's death, I was sitting in the library, the one room Margaret rarely entered, when I found it. A letter. It was tucked inside one of my father's favorite books, a leather-bound copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. I'd picked up the book without thinking, just wanting to feel close to him, and the envelope fell out onto my lap. It was addressed to me in my father's handwriting. My hand shook as I opened it. Madison, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I need you to know the truth. The will Henderson has is not the one I signed. I left everything to you. The company, the estate, the accounts, all of it. It's yours. You earned it. You deserve it. I put the real will in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 743. The key is hidden in your mother's music box, the one with the dancing ballerina. If anything happens to me, if Margaret tries to take what's yours, fight back. Don't let her win. I love you more than anything in this world. You are my greatest achievement. I read it 3 times before my brain could process what it meant. Margaret had forged the will. She'd stolen my inheritance. She'd looked me in the eyes and lied over and over, while I thanked her for letting me stay in my own house. The rage that hit me was physical. My vision went red. My hands clenched so tight the paper crumpled. I wanted to march upstairs and scream at her. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to destroy her the way she'd destroyed me. But I didn't. I sat there in the library, breathing slowly, forcing myself to think. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. She'd call me crazy, grief-stricken, delusional. She had the official will. She had lawyers. She had money and power and connections. I had a letter and rage and nothing else. I needed proof. I needed a plan. I needed to be smarter than she was. So I became someone else. I became the grieving niece who'd accepted her fate. I smiled at Margaret over breakfast. I thanked her for her generosity. I stopped applying for jobs and started acting like I was content to live off her charity. I made myself small and quiet and harmless. And while I played that role, I started investigating. My mother's music box was exactly where I remembered it, in the back of my closet behind my winter coats. The key was there, taped to the bottom of the velvet lining. I held it in my palm, this tiny piece of metal that represented everything my father had wanted for me, and I made a promise to him. I would get it back. All of it. Getting to the bank was tricky. Margaret watched me more closely than I'd realized. She asked where I was going every time I left the house. She had the housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, report on my movements. So I started taking long walks, establishing a routine, always heading toward the beach at the same time every afternoon. After 2 weeks, no one paid attention anymore. One Tuesday, I walked to the beach, then doubled back through the woods and caught a bus to downtown Westport. First National Bank was a gray stone building that looked like it had been there forever. I walked in with my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The safety deposit boxes were in the basement. A young clerk with red hair and too much perfume led me down the stairs, checked my ID, matched my signature, and left me alone in a small room with box 743. Inside was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope was the real will, notarized and signed, leaving everything to me. There were also bank statements showing transfers from my father's accounts to Margaret's, all dated after his death. There was a copy of another will, one that had been drafted 3 weeks before Dad died, the one Henderson had read to us. And there was a flash drive with a note that said, medical records. Look at the dates. Copied everything on my phone. I took photos of every page, every statement, every signature. Then I put it all back in the box and walked out of that bank feeling like a different person. I had proof now. I had ammunition. But I still needed more. I needed to understand exactly what Margaret had done and how deep her crimes went. The flash drive was encrypted, but I'd learned basic coding in college. It took me 3 days to crack it, working late at night after Margaret went to bed, my laptop hidden under blankets to hide the glow. What I found made me physically sick. Medical records from Westport Hospital showing my father's treatment in his final weeks. But the dates were wrong. According to these records, Dad had been unconscious, in a medically induced coma, when he supposedly signed the forged will. He couldn't have signed anything. He was dying, pumped full of morphine, his brain shutting down. Margaret had created fake medical records to cover the time period when the will was signed. Or someone had done it for her. Someone with access to the hospital system. Someone who could manipulate digital records and make it look legitimate. This wasn't just fraud. This was conspiracy. This was premeditated, calculated evil. I started following Margaret. Not physically, I wasn't that stupid, but digitally. I hacked into her email using her birthday as the password because she was exactly that arrogant. What I found was an entire network of corruption. Margaret had been planning this for years, maybe since before my mother died. She'd been slowly positioning herself, getting close to Dad's lawyers, his accountants, his doctors. She'd befriended Mr. Henderson's wife, donated to their favorite charities, ingratiated herself into their lives. The emails between Margaret and Henderson were casual, friendly, and absolutely damning. They talked about the will in detail, about how to make it look legitimate, about what story to tell if anyone questioned it. Henderson had drafted the fake will. He'd filed it. He'd looked me in the eyes and read it aloud knowing it was fraud. And Margaret had paid him $200,000 for his cooperation, transferred in 3 installments to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But there was more. So much more. Margaret had also been stealing from Pierce Industries for years, skimming money from accounts, creating fake vendors and billing the company for non-existent services. She'd set up shell corporations, laundered money through them, built herself a financial empire using my father's company as her personal piggy bank. And Dad had never noticed because he trusted her. His baby sister. Family. The emails showed something else too. Margaret had a partner, someone she referred to only as R in the messages. They never used this person's full name, never mentioned details, but R had helped with everything. The medical records, the bank transfers, the shell corporations. R was the technical expert, the one who knew how to manipulate systems and hide digital trails. And Margaret was terrified of R. I could tell from the tone of her messages. She did whatever R told her to do. I needed to find R. That was the missing piece. But first, I needed to secure my own evidence, make sure Margaret couldn't destroy it if she figured out what I was doing. So I started sending myself encrypted emails, backing up everything to cloud storage accounts registered under fake names. I made copies of copies. I created a digital paper trail that couldn't be erased. For months after finding my father's letter, I had everything I needed to destroy Margaret. But I wanted more. I wanted her to suffer the way she'd made me suffer. I wanted her humiliated, exposed, ruined in front of everyone she tried to impress. So I waited, planned. I became a ghost in my own house, invisible and patient. Margaret was planning a charity gala, her biggest event of the year, to be held at the estate. 300 guests, all of Westport's elite. A black tie affair to raise money for children's hospitals. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was using my father's money to buy herself a reputation as a philanthropist while I ate her table scraps. The invitations went out 6 weeks in advance. The event would be in the main ballroom, the one with the wall of windows overlooking the Sound, where my parents had celebrated their 20th anniversary. I volunteered to help plan it. Margaret was shocked at first, suspicious even, but I played my role perfectly. I told her I wanted to honor Dad's memory. That charity work made me feel close to him. She bought it because she wanted to believe it. She wanted to think she'd broken me, that I'd given up. So she let me handle the technical details, the audiovisual setup, the projector for her presentation about the hospital wing she was funding. My father's hospital wing, named after the man she'd betrayed. I spent 2 weeks setting up the equipment. I told Margaret I wanted everything perfect. I tested the projector system, the microphones, the lighting. And while I did that, I built in a backdoor, a way to access the system remotely and change what was being displayed. The AV company thought I was just being thorough. Margaret thought I was being useful. No one suspected what I was really doing. Finding her turned out to be easier than I expected. I set up a fake email account pretending to be a journalist investigating healthcare fraud. I sent messages to everyone who worked at Westport Hospital's IT department, asking vague questions about system security. Most ignored me. One person responded with a level of defensiveness that was immediately suspicious. Robert Chen. Mrs. Chen's son. Our housekeeper's son. I'd known him since we were kids. He'd been in my high school class, 2 years behind me. Quiet, brilliant with computers, always weird around me. And now he was working at the hospital, with full access to medical records. I confronted Mrs. Chen first. I waited until Margaret was out at lunch, then found her in the kitchen. I told her I knew what Robert had done, that I had proof, that he was going to prison unless she helped me. She cried. She begged. She told me everything. Margaret had paid Robert $50,000 to alter my father's medical records. She'd threatened to have Mrs. Chen deported, even though she'd been a legal resident for 30 years. Robert did it to protect his mother. He'd been drowning in student loans, desperate for money, and Margaret had exploited that. I should have hated him, but I couldn't. He was another victim. We all were. So I made Mrs. Chen a deal. Robert would testify about what Margaret made him do. He'd provide evidence of the medical record fraud. In exchange, I'd pay his legal fees and make sure he got immunity. She agreed. She didn't have a choice. The night of the gala, I dressed in the black designer gown Margaret had bought me, the one that cost more than my monthly allowance. She wanted me to look good, to play the part of the grateful niece. I did my makeup carefully, curled my hair, put on the pearls that had been my mother's. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I'd lost weight over the past 6 months. My face was sharper, harder. My eyes looked older. I looked like someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side carrying gasoline and matches. The ballroom was stunning. White flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers glowing, a string quartet playing near the windows. Guests arrived in waves, wealthy couples in tuxedos and evening gowns, air-kissing Margaret and telling her how wonderful she looked, how generous she was, how much they admired her. She glowed under the attention. She gave a speech about my father, about his legacy, about how she was honored to continue his charitable work. People actually cried. I stood in the back, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching her lie to 300 people without even blinking. The presentation was scheduled for 8:30. Margaret was going to show slides about the hospital wing, talk about the children they'd help, ask for donations. The projector was set up, the screen down, the lights dimmed. She walked to the podium, radiant in her silver dress, and began to speak. I waited until she was 3 minutes in, until everyone was focused on her, until the room was completely silent. Then I pulled out my phone and activated the backdoor I'd built into the AV system. The slide on the screen changed. Instead of sick children and smiling doctors, it showed the forged will, my father's signature clearly visible, dated the day he was in a coma. Margaret stopped mid-sentence. She stared at the screen, confused, then turned to look for the AV technician. But I'd sent him on a break. There was no one at the controls. The slide changed again. Bank transfers from my father's accounts to Margaret's. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. All dated after his death. Another change. The real will, leaving everything to me, notarized and legal. Another change. Emails between Margaret and Mr. Henderson discussing how much to pay him for his cooperation. The room exploded. People were shouting, gasping, pointing at the screen. Margaret was screaming at someone to turn it off, but the slides kept coming. Shell corporations. Fake invoices. Stolen money. Robert's testimony about altering medical records. His signed affidavit displayed for everyone to see. My father's letter to me, enlarged so every word was visible. Don't let her win. I walked to the front of the room. People moved aside like I was radioactive. I took the microphone from Margaret's shaking hands. She tried to hold on to it, but her grip was weak. She looked at me and I saw it in her eyes. She knew. She knew it was over. Here's something nobody talks about when they discuss revenge. That moment when you've won, when you've destroyed someone who destroyed you, you expect to feel triumphant, powerful, vindicated. But what I felt was empty. Looking at Margaret's face, seeing her completely broken in front of everyone she tried to impress, I just felt tired. Tired and sad and sick of all of it. But I wasn't done yet. I'd come too far to stop now. I spoke into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. I told them everything. How my aunt had forged my father's will. How she'd stolen my inheritance. How she'd paid lawyers and IT workers to help her commit fraud. How she'd built her reputation as a philanthropist using money she'd embezzled from Pierce Industries. How everything they'd admired about her was a lie. I told them about finding my father's letter, about the real will in the safety deposit box, about 6 months of pretending to be broken while I gathered evidence. And then I told them the police were waiting outside, because I'd sent everything to the district attorney 3 days ago, and arrest warrants had been issued that afternoon. Margaret collapsed, just crumpled onto the floor like someone had cut her strings. People rushed forward, but I held up my hand. Don't touch her. She doesn't deserve your sympathy. She doesn't deserve anything. 2 police officers came through the ballroom doors. I'd coordinated with them beforehand, told them exactly when to arrive. They read Margaret her rights while 300 people watched in complete silence. She didn't resist. She couldn't even stand on her own. They had to practically carry her out. Mr. Henderson tried to run. He made it to the parking lot before they caught him. I watched through the windows as they put him in the back of a police car. His wife screaming and crying on the lawn. I should have felt sorry for her. She probably didn't know what he'd done. But I couldn't feel anything except a grim satisfaction that he'd be held accountable. The aftermath was chaos. The gala ended immediately. Guests fled like the building was on fire. Several reporters had been in attendance, and the story hit the news within an hour. Heiress exposes aunt's fraud at charity gala. It was everywhere by morning. National news. Social media exploded. I became famous overnight. The girl who'd been betrayed and fought back. People called me brave. They called me a hero. They called me inspiring. I didn't feel like any of those things. Felt hollowed out. Pierce Industries went into chaos. With Margaret arrested and her fraud exposed, the board had to act fast. They installed an interim CEO and launched a full investigation into the company's finances. Turns out Margaret had stolen over $3 million over a 5-year period. The shell corporations she'd created were legion. It took forensic accountants 6 weeks to untangle everything. The company's stock price dropped 40% in a single day. I filed a motion to probate my father's real will. With all the evidence I'd gathered, it was a formality. The judge ruled in my favor within 2 weeks. Everything Margaret had stolen was returned to me. The estate, the company, the bank accounts, all of it. I was suddenly worth $40 million. I was the CEO of Pierce Industries. I was exactly what my father had wanted me to be. And I'd never felt more alone in my life. Margaret's trial was a media circus. Every news outlet covered it. The prosecution used all my evidence. Robert Chen testified about altering the medical records. Henderson pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. He got 5 years. Margaret's lawyers tried everything, claimed she'd been coerced, claimed the evidence was fabricated, claimed I'd manipulated the situation. Nothing worked. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison. I was in the courtroom when they read the verdict. Margaret looked at me across the room, and for just a second I saw my aunt again. Not the monster who'd stolen from me, but the woman who'd taught me to ride a bike when I was 6. Who'd held me when my mother died. Who'd been at every piano recital and school play and graduation. I'd loved her once. She'd loved me too, maybe, in whatever twisted way she was capable of loving anyone. And I'd destroyed her. Completely. Irreversibly. There was no coming back from this. Was it worth it? I don't know. I got my inheritance back. Got justice. Got revenge. But I also lost the last member of my family. Margaret will die in prison. She's 52 years old and sick with diabetes. She'll never see another Christmas outside of a cell. And I did that. Me. Not the courts. Not karma. I orchestrated her complete destruction, and I can never undo it. Running Pierce Industries turned out to be harder than I expected. I'd studied for it my whole life, but theory and practice are different things. The company was damaged, bleeding money, losing clients who didn't want to be associated with the scandal. I spent 18-hour days trying to rebuild, firing people who'd helped Margaret, hiring new executives, restructuring departments, renegotiating contracts. Some days I wanted to sell it all and walk away. But that would mean my father's legacy died with him, and I couldn't let that happen. 6 months after Margaret's sentencing, I was sitting in my father's office at Pierce Industries, the corner office with the view of the harbor, when I got a letter. It was from Margaret. Prison mail, her inmate number stamped on the envelope. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity won. Or maybe I needed closure. Or maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. Inside was a single page, her handwriting shaky and small. Madison, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need to say it. I was jealous. Of your mother, of your father's love for you, of everything you had that I never could. I wanted it so badly I convinced myself I deserved it. I told myself your father would have wanted me to have it, that I'd earned it by being there when his business struggled, by sacrificing my own career to help him. I believed my own lies until they became truth. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I did love you in my own broken way. I'm sorry I couldn't be better. I'm sorry I hurt you. I hope you can be happy, Madison. I hope you can find peace. That's all I want for you now. I read it 3 times, then put it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. What could I say? I couldn't forgive her. I couldn't forget what she'd done. But I also couldn't hate her the way I used to. The rage had burned out, leaving behind only exhaustion and sadness and a strange kind of pity. She'd destroyed her own life chasing something that was never hers to take. She'd traded 15 years of freedom for money she barely got to spend. She'd lost everything, including herself. And I'd helped make that happen. Have you ever had to choose between justice and mercy, knowing that whatever you choose will change you forever? Do you think revenge can ever truly heal you, or does it just create a different kind of wound? And when you've lost everything and fought to get it back, how do you live with the person you became in the fight? Pierce Industries is thriving now. We're profitable again, expanding into new markets, hiring new people. I'm good at this job. Really good. My father would be proud. But some nights I lie awake in the master bedroom of the estate, in the house that's too big and too empty and too full of ghosts, and I wonder if this is what winning feels like. I have money and power and success. I have everything my father wanted for me. But I eat dinner alone. I go to bed alone. I wake up alone. The only family I had left is in prison because of me. I visit Margaret once a month. I don't know why. Maybe because she's still my aunt, despite everything. Maybe because I need to see what I've done, need to face it directly instead of hiding from it. We don't talk much. She asks about the company. I tell her it's doing well. Not. Sometimes she cries. I never do, not in front of her. I save my crying for the drive home, on the highway where no one can see me. I tell myself I did the right thing. I tell myself she deserved it. I tell myself I had no choice. Some days I even believe it. The thing about revenge is that it's supposed to make you feel better. That's what we tell ourselves. That's what every movie and book and story promises. The hero gets justice, defeats the villain, rides off into the sunset feeling vindicated and whole. But real life isn't a movie. Real revenge is messy and complicated, and it leaves scars on everyone involved. I got everything I wanted. I exposed Margaret's crimes. I reclaimed my inheritance. I destroyed her completely. And I'm not sure any of it made me happy. There's a photo on my desk at the office. It's from my college graduation. Dad has his arm around me, both of us grinning at the camera. Margaret is in the background, slightly out of focus, smiling at us with what looks like genuine joy. I look at that photo sometimes and try to remember when we were happy, before greed and betrayal and revenge poisoned everything. I try to remember what it felt like to have a family. But the memory gets hazier every day, replaced by the image of Margaret in handcuffs being led out of the ballroom while 300 people watched. If I could go back, would I do it differently? Would I confront her privately instead of exposing her publicly? Would I try to understand her motives instead of destroying her life? I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. She stole everything from me and I wasn't going to let her win. But I also recognize that I became someone my father wouldn't recognize in the process. I became cold and calculating and ruthless. I became someone who could smile at her aunt over breakfast while plotting her complete destruction. That person scares me sometimes. That person lives inside me now and I can't get rid of her. The court appointed a therapist for me during the investigation. She said I was experiencing complicated grief mixed with trauma and righteous anger. She said my actions were understandable given what I'd been through. She said I needed to forgive myself for the choices I made. But how do you forgive yourself for destroying someone? How do you live with knowing you had the power to show mercy and chose vengeance instead? These are questions I don't have answers to. Questions that keep me awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. Robert Chen works for Pierce Industries now. I hired him as our head of IT security. He's brilliant at his job, probably because he knows exactly how systems can be manipulated and exploited. He never talks about what he did for Margaret. We have an unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. But sometimes I catch him looking at me with this expression that's part guilt and part fear, like he's waiting for me to change my mind about giving him a second chance. I want to tell him I understand, that we were both Margaret's victims, that he doesn't need to be afraid of me. But I never do. Maybe because I like that he's afraid. Maybe because that small measure of power makes me feel less powerless in everything else. Mrs. Chin still works at the estate. She cooks and cleans and tends the gardens like she always has. We don't talk about Margaret or Robert or any of it. She does her job and I try to stay out of her way. But once, about 3 months ago, I found her crying in the kitchen. It was late, past midnight, and I'd come down for water. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, tears streaming down her face. I asked if she was okay. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for what my son did to your father. I'm sorry we helped her hurt you." I told her it wasn't her fault. I told her Margaret had manipulated everyone. She nodded but kept crying. I sat with her until she stopped. We never mentioned it again. The media eventually moved on to other stories. I'm not headline news anymore. The trial is over, the scandal is old news. People have found new things to be outraged about. I'm grateful for the anonymity. I can go to coffee shops and restaurants without being recognized now. I can live my life without cameras following me. But sometimes I miss the attention in a weird way. When everyone was watching, I felt like I was doing something important. Now I'm just another CEO trying to keep her company afloat. It's boring and lonely and exhausting. I've been on exactly 3 dates since Margaret's arrest. All disasters. The first guy knew who I was and spent the entire evening asking questions about the trial. The second guy didn't know who I was and I spent the entire evening terrified he'd find out. The third guy found out mid-date when someone recognized me at the restaurant and asked for a photo. He called me a liar for not telling him up front. I haven't tried dating since. What's the point? How do you build a relationship when you're famous for destroying your only family member? What do you say when someone asks about your aunt? Oh, she's in federal prison because I orchestrated her public humiliation and arrest. Want to order dessert? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found my father's letter. If I'd just accepted the forged will and moved on. Maybe I'd have gotten a normal job, found a normal life, been a normal person. Maybe I'd be happy in some small, uncomplicated way. But then I remember Margaret living in my house, spending my money, parading around as a philanthropist using what she'd stolen from me. And I know I couldn't have lived with that. The rage would have eaten me alive from the inside out. At least this way I fought back. At least this way she faced consequences. Even if those consequences haunt me every single day. The worst part isn't the loneliness or the guilt or the complicated grief. The worst part is knowing that I'm capable of what I did. That I have that kind of ruthlessness inside me. That when pushed far enough, I can be just as cold and calculating as Margaret was. That scares me more than anything. Because if I could do it to her, who else could I do it to? What other lines would I cross if someone hurt me again? I don't trust myself anymore. I don't trust the person I've become. My father's grave is in Oakwood Cemetery, next to my mother's. I visit every Sunday, rain or shine. I sit on the bench nearby and tell him about the company, about the deals I'm negotiating, about the new products we're developing. I tell him I'm doing my best to honor his legacy. I tell him I'm sorry for the scandal, for dragging the Pierce name through the mud, for making his death about fraud and betrayal instead of the life he lived. I tell him I miss him so much it physically hurts sometimes. I never tell him about the nightmares. I never tell him about the panic attacks. I never tell him how I lie awake wondering if he'd be disappointed in the person I've become. Last week, I got a call from Margaret's lawyer. She's sick, some kind of infection that's not responding to antibiotics. She's in the prison hospital. They're not sure if she'll make it. The lawyer asked if I wanted to visit. I said I'd think about it. I haven't decided yet. Part of me thinks I should go, that I owe her that much. Part of me thinks I've given her enough already. And part of me, the part I'm most ashamed of, doesn't want to see her dying because that would make her human again, and it's easier to live with what I did when I can think of her as a monster. Do you think some betrayals are too big to forgive? Or is holding on to anger just another way of letting the person who hurt you continue to have power over your life? When you win a war but lose yourself in the process, can you ever really call it a victory? And if you had the chance to destroy someone who destroyed you, knowing it would change you forever, would you still do it? I decided to visit Margaret. I don't know what changed my mind. Maybe it was the thought of her dying alone in a prison hospital. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just exhaustion from carrying around all this anger and hurt. I drove to the Federal Correctional Facility in Danbury on a Thursday afternoon. The sky gray and threatening rain. The guard at the entrance recognized me. Everyone here knows who I am. I'm the niece who put one of their inmates away. They treat me with a strange mix of respect and suspicion. The prison hospital smells like disinfectant and despair. Margaret looks tiny in the bed, hooked up to machines that beep and hiss. She's lost weight, her skin has a grayish tint, and her hair, which used to be perfectly highlighted and styled, is completely white and thin. She's only 52, but she looks 70. She opened her eyes when I walked in, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. What do you say to someone you destroyed? What do you say to someone who destroyed you first? I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed. The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. Finally she spoke, her voice raspy and weak. Kim, I didn't think you would. I told her I almost didn't. She nodded like she understood. We talked for 20 minutes. Not about the fraud or the trial or any of it. We talked about my father, about memories from when I was little, about Christmases and birthday parties and summer vacations. We talked about my mother, how much Margaret had loved her sister-in-law, how devastated she'd been when cancer took her. We talked about the life we'd had before everything went wrong. And then Margaret said something that's been haunting me ever since. She said, I became someone I didn't recognize, Madison. I wanted what you had so badly that I turned into a monster. But you did the same thing. You wanted revenge so badly that you became just like me. Cold. Calculating. Willing to destroy someone completely. We're the same now, you and I. We're both monsters. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that what I did was justice while what she did was theft. But the words wouldn't come because deep down I knew she was right. The infection killed Margaret 3 days later. I was the only person at her funeral besides the prison chaplain and the guards. I buried her in the Pierce family plot, next to my father, because she was still family despite everything. As they lowered her casket into the ground, I felt something inside me break open. Not grief exactly. More like a dam bursting. I cried for the first time since the gala, really cried, the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep in your chest. I cried for my father and my mother and my aunt and for myself. I cried for the family we used to be and for the family we'd never be again. Standing there at Margaret's grave, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd done. I couldn't bring her back or take back the public humiliation or the 15-year sentence. But I could choose who I became moving forward. I could choose not to let the anger and bitterness define the rest of my life. I could choose to be better than the person I'd been when I orchestrated her destruction. It sounds simple when I say it like that, but it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. Every day I have to actively choose not to be the person who destroyed her aunt. Some days I succeed. Some days I fail spectacularly. I started therapy again, with a different therapist this time. One who doesn't just tell me my actions were understandable. Ramon challenges me. She makes me look at the ugliest parts of myself, the parts that enjoyed Margaret's suffering, the parts that felt powerful watching her be led away in handcuffs. She makes me acknowledge that yes, I had every right to seek justice, but I didn't have to enjoy destroying her so much. There's a difference between holding someone accountable and obliterating them. I crossed that line and I need to own that. Pierce Industries is doing better than ever. We just closed a major deal with a European manufacturer. We're opening a new facility in North Carolina that'll create 500 jobs. I'm being profiled in business magazines as one of the youngest female CEOs in the manufacturing sector. People call me a visionary, a success story, an inspiration. They have no idea how broken I feel inside. They see the professional accomplishments and the growing bank account. They don't see me at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father would recognize the person I've become. I've been thinking about selling the estate. It's too big, too full of memories, both good and terrible. Every room reminds me of something I've lost. The library where I found my father's letter. The ballroom where I exposed Margaret. The master bedroom where she slept in my father's bed while I planned her destruction. I walk through those rooms and I feel like I'm haunting my own life. Maybe a fresh start would help. Smaller place. Something that's mine and not weighted down with decades of Pierce family history. But then I think about my father, about how much he loved that house, about how he wanted me to have it. Selling it feels like giving up, like letting Margaret's betrayal win even after she's dead. So I stay. I rattle around in 15 rooms by myself, trying to figure out how to live in a mausoleum of my own making. Mrs. Chen says I should get a dog. She's probably right. At least then I'd have something alive in this house besides plants and regrets. I've started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. Not as Madison Pierce, CEO and heiress. Just as Maddie, someone who shows up twice a week to help serve meals and listen to stories. These women have lost everything, homes and families and safety, and they're trying to rebuild their lives from nothing. They remind me that I'm not the only person who's been betrayed, not the only person who's had to fight back. But they also remind me that revenge isn't the only option. Some of them chose forgiveness. Some chose to just move on and never look back. Some found peace in ways I can't even imagine. There's a woman named Sarah at the shelter. She's 43, left an abusive husband who stole all their money and left her homeless with 2 kids. She has every reason to be angry, to want revenge, to destroy him the way he destroyed her. But when I asked her if she ever thinks about getting back at him, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "Why would I waste energy on him? He already took enough from me. I'm focused on building something new, not tearing down something old." That hit me hard. Because I'd spent 6 months of my life focused entirely on tearing Margaret down. And what did it get me? A hollow victory and a lifetime of guilt. Here's what nobody tells you about revenge. Even when you win, even when you get everything you wanted, there's this moment afterward where you realize it didn't fix anything. The hurt is still there. The betrayal still happened. Your father is still dead. Your family is still gone. All you've done is create more pain, more loss, more damage. And you have to live with being the person who created it. That's the real cost. Not the time or the effort or the risk. The real cost is living with who you became in the process. I've been offered book deals. Publishers want me to write about what happened, about how I exposed Margaret, about the whole dramatic story. They say it would be inspiring, empowering, a story about a woman who refused to be a victim. They're offering ridiculous amounts of money. I've turned them all down. Because writing it would mean reliving it. And I relive it enough in my nightmares without immortalizing it in print. And because I'm not sure it's a story that should inspire anyone. Maybe it's a cautionary tale instead. Maybe the moral isn't fight back against those who wrong you. Maybe the moral is, be careful what you're willing to become in the name of justice. Robert Chen and I had coffee last week. He's dating someone, a nice woman who works in marketing. He seems happy, or at least happier than he was a year ago. We talked about work and normal things, and then out of nowhere he said, "Do you ever regret it? Not exposing her, but the way you did it. Making it so public." I thought about lying. But Robert was there. He knows what it cost everyone. So I told him the truth. Every single day. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then he said something I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "My therapist told me that hurt people hurt people. Margaret was hurt by something in her past, so she hurt you. You were hurt by her, so you hurt her back. But at some point someone has to break the cycle. Someone has to choose not to pass the pain along. I think you're trying to do that now. That counts for something. Does it though? Does trying to be better after you've already done your worst actually count for anything? I want to believe it does. I have to believe it does. Because if it doesn't, if I'm just stuck being this person forever, the person who destroyed her aunt and lost herself in the process, then what's the point of any of this? What's the point of the therapy and the volunteering and the desperate attempts to feel like a decent human being again? My father's business partner, James, came to see me last month. He's 70 now, retired to Florida, but he flew up specifically to talk to me. We had lunch at the yacht club, the same place where Dad and I used to have Sunday brunch. James knew my father for 40 years. He knew Margaret too. He'd watched our whole family fall apart from the outside. And he told me something I'd never known. He said Margaret had a daughter once, years ago, before I was born. She got pregnant at 19, and her boyfriend left her. Her parents, my grandparents, were furious. They made her give the baby up for adoption. Margaret wanted to keep her, but they threatened to disown her if she did. So she gave the baby away, and it destroyed something inside her. James said he thought Margaret looked at me and saw everything she'd lost. Daughter, family, father's love. She saw me getting everything she'd been denied, and it twisted her up inside until she couldn't see straight anymore. It doesn't excuse what she did. Nothing excuses stealing from your own family. But it explains it, maybe. It makes her human instead of just a monster. And honestly, I'm not sure if knowing that makes things better or worse. Because now I can't just hate her. Now I have to see her as a broken person who did terrible things because she was broken. And that's so much harder to live with. I tried to find Margaret's daughter. I hired a private investigator. I thought maybe I could meet her, could tell her about Margaret, could give her some kind of closure. But the adoption was closed. The records are sealed. Margaret's daughter, my cousin, is out there somewhere with no idea her birth mother died in prison or that she has family looking for her. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe she has a good life and doesn't need this mess dragging her down. But I think about her sometimes. I wonder if she ever thinks about the woman who gave her away. I wonder if she'd want to know the truth. I wonder if the truth would destroy her the way it destroyed me. The company is planning a charity initiative. Nothing as big as Margaret's galas, but something meaningful. We're funding scholarships for students who've lost parents, kids who are trying to build futures without the safety net of family support. I'm doing it in my father's name, but really I'm doing it for me. I need to believe that something good can come from all this pain and loss and destruction. I need to believe that I can use my father's money, the money Margaret tried to steal, the money that caused all this damage, to actually help people instead of hurt them. Maybe that's naive. Maybe it's not enough. But it's something. It's a start. Ramon asked me in our last session if I've forgiven Margaret. I told her I don't know what forgiveness even means in this context. How do you forgive someone for stealing your entire life? How do you forgive someone who looked you in the eyes and lied while you thanked them? But then she asked a different question. She asked if I've forgiven myself. And I realized that's the real issue. I can't forgive myself for becoming someone who could orchestrate another person's destruction so thoroughly. I can't forgive myself for enjoying it. I can't forgive myself for choosing revenge over mercy when I had the chance to do either one. She told me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing. It's about releasing the grip the past has on your present. It's about choosing not to be defined by the worst thing that happened to you or the worst thing you've done. It's about accepting that you're human and flawed and capable of both great strength and terrible cruelty, and choosing to move forward anyway. I'm trying. God, I'm trying. But some days the weight of what I've done feels so heavy I can barely breathe under it. Some days I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the person staring back. Some days I'm still that girl standing at the gala with a microphone, destroying someone because I could, because I wanted to, because the rage was too big to contain. Yesterday I drove past the house where Margaret used to live, before she moved into the estate. It's a small colonial in Old Greenwich, white with black shutters, a garden in front that someone is maintaining beautifully. Family lives there now. I saw kids playing in the yard, a mom calling them in for dinner. It looked so normal, so peaceful, so untouched by the darkness that consumed the woman who used to live there. I wondered if the new owners knew. I wondered if they could feel the sadness in the walls or if houses forget the people who inhabited them. I wondered if the estate would ever forget Margaret, or if her ghost would haunt those rooms forever. I wondered if my children, if I ever have children, would grow up in a house stained by betrayal and revenge, or if time could wash all of that away eventually. I'm 25 years old. I've been through a lifetime of grief and betrayal and revenge. I've lost my parents and my aunt and any sense of innocence I might have had about family or trust or what people are capable of doing to each other. I've become the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company. I've exposed fraud and corruption. I've sent people to prison. I've been called brave and ruthless and inspiring and cold. And I have no idea who I actually am underneath all of that. I feel like I'm wearing a costume, playing a role, pretending to be someone who has it all together. The truth is I'm lost. I'm scared. I'm so tired of being angry and guilty and confused about whether I did the right thing or just the thing that felt right in the moment. Have you ever felt like you won the battle but lost yourself in the war? Have you ever looked back on a choice you made and realized you became exactly the thing you were fighting against? And have you ever wondered if there's a way back from that, or if some lines, once crossed, leave you changed forever? That's where I am right now. Standing on the other side of my revenge, looking at the wreckage, trying to figure out how to build a life from the pieces. Maybe that's the real story. Not the exposure or the trial or the dramatic confrontation. Maybe the real story is what comes after. The long, hard work of trying to be better than your worst moment. The daily choice to not let bitterness and rage define who you are. The struggle to find meaning in the mess you've made. I don't have answers yet. I'm not sure I ever will. But I'm trying. That has to count for something. Has to.